and understand what works and what doesn't work. And that's really the big message that I'm trying to deliver to the governments over here is like, look, I'm not coming in here as some suit wearing Westerner telling you how to do your business. I'm telling you, we monumentally screwed this up in North America. And I am a walking repository of all of those mistakes. So I would love to share those mistakes with you and give you some pointers on how to avoid falling into the same pitfalls.
Can big data save cannabis? In a world where data is seemingly at the crux of everything from online marketing success to operational efficiency, businesses of all kinds are doubling down on their stats and facts. But how can cannabis companies get on board? We speak to Eric Boone, CEO at Meristematix, about the future he's working towards. Now, hello and welcome to the Lobsterpot podcast. I'm Dave Barton, and unfortunately I'm not in this lovely sort of tropical cannabis environment. We're in a cold, well, it's not rainy, is it, Jamie? It's not rainy today. Well, it's not here anyway.
Today. We always just steer it as early as possible into the most traditional British conversation, don't we?
We do, because I feel very British. I feel often, because we deal with people from different parts of the world, it's always like, oh, what should we do? Oh, the weather's shite, isn't it? That's what we do, is, all that kind of British bollocks. But again, talking about our guest today, who's in beautiful Portugal. We're just comparing notes on the weather, as is tradition, as you say. And he's originally from the US. We have Eric Boone, from CEO of Meristematix, based in Portugal. How are you doing today, sir? How are you doing?
Great. Wonderful to speak with you today.
Yes, and you too, sir. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing, because again, one of my major bugbears, I think, I'm just going to put it out there, with the cannabis industry is this. And I think it's not through anyone's fault other than maybe the way the market's taking a long time to become sort of, accepted. It's that whole level of professionalism. And I think a lot of that comes from, how do we use data? What way and again, that's something you specialize in. So tell us more about that, how you're helping cannabis companies use data in an optimal way and for what purpose. Tell us more.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Let me start by going into a little bit of a background of where I stand in the industry, because I've been around since about 2009, when I took over one of the first publicly traded companies that was specifically geared toward medical cannabis. In 2009, that was still pretty risky because there was a lot less of the broader social acceptance, and it was still very early in. It was prior to any U.S. market legalizing recreational cannabis. So it was kind of a new time, a new era. And it has also allowed me to see over the last 13, 14 years, a great deal of evolution in the cannabis space. And one thing that I think that we can safely say is that entrepreneurs within this space have a bit of a different programming. I mean, it's in any sort of situation where you dive in. I mean, of course, a whole new global industry only pops up every other career. So it's a tremendous opportunity to innovate within an entirely new global market space. But it's also very new. And a lot of the challenges that face cannabis entrepreneurs don't face typical businesses, particularly the access to traditional capital and banking in the U.S. because of the federal illegality. Now, of course, that's a little bit different in Canada, but in the U.S., which is pretty much the largest recreational market right now, we can definitely see that that's impeding the loss of abilities to take advantage of things like writing off your cost of goods sold is a tremendous impact on businesses. And you combine on that really egregious tax rates and very limiting regulations. It's a very challenging environment for entrepreneurs. So it's forced them to learn very, very quickly and leapfrog a lot of lessons that perhaps traditional businesses have been afforded the time to take longer to learn. And in the early days, in the early 2010s, when the recreational programs started coming online, when medical programs got more prevalent, that overregulation really impeded a lot of businesses because you produce so much data at every touch point from seed to sale. It's generating data, and all of that had to be cataloged for purposes of traceability. And so it was a really daunting task for cannabis businesses in those early days. What am I going to do? Like, how am I going to organize all these data? Like, what's the benefit of this? It was almost like saving records in case you got audited from the IRS one day, but there was really nothing more actionable to do with it other than just sit on it and hope you didn't mess it up, like convolute your data. So fast forward to about 2015, 2016, when AI started to really enter into the broader zeitgeist and a lot more aggressively. All of a sudden, these cannabis businesses, because AI and machine learning are a lot of the foundation of the advanced data analytics that we can do these days. And I can explain a little bit more about that later, but the mindset in the industry started changing. And all of a sudden, these data troves that they'd once seen as quite onerous, they realized, because the managers, a lot of them, they're not just pot growers growing up. I mean, we've got Fortune 50 executives who understand the nuances of business entering into this industry. And that's sort of the mindset that I had in approaching this. I went out into the marketplace looking for a robust analytics engine, and opted to partner with one that had already been around since 2008. So a highly trained model, works specifically with plants and greenhouses and retailers. And the focus is on replenishment and price elasticity. So essentially what we're doing is telling businesses, okay, particularly retailers, you need to have this much product in this location and charge this price for it, because we do price elasticity modeling either. So essentially it's using your existing data and trends in consumer patterns to ascertain what future demand is going to be. It's predictive analytics. It's predicting what's going to happen in the future, allowing you to sort of play where the puck's going to be, as opposed to playing where the puck is. Yeah.
No, that's really interesting. I think, again, given how volatile the cannabis industry is, how do you kind of, what is there to kind of predict on if the previous kind of iteration of what has happened before? So you're relying on previous data to predict future data, but there's that uncertainty because, it could go any direction. How do you kind of couch that, if you like? How do you figure out what's going to happen when anything could happen?
Sure. And I mean, there are ample examples of that. I mean, the pandemic is a prime example. That was just one massive outlier, particularly in a North American perspective. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, no one can go to work anymore, but cannabis businesses are considered an essential business, so all the pot shops will stay open. And by the way, here's a great big stimulus check. So all of a sudden, everyone in the U.S. was home all alone. Uncle Sam was sending them, free money, and all the pot shops were open. So the spike that we saw in sales in the early days of the pandemic were an outlier. And, that's one of the limitations of AI when you're monitoring patterns. But one of the big differentiating factors of the Meristematix engine is that we don't just take into account the business's sales data. It takes into account a lot of extenuating circumstances, a lot of external factors, over 35,000 of them, to be precise. So it's not just taking into account, your previous sales and the sales trends. It's also looking at the specific market you're in, demographics, psychographics, weather patterns, traffic patterns. It's just ties into a bunch of different data resources and mixes them all up into a big soup. And back in real estate, we'd call this real options analysis, where you're essentially just looking at so many different factors that you really mitigate any one particular outlier completely screwing up the results. But that being said, AIs get better with time. So these occurrences, they just come in, the AI takes into consideration, and it becomes a part of the algorithm moving forward. So it's not an end all and a be all, but when you look at the science of it, when you look at the comparisons between human-made decision making and data-driven AI-assisted decision making, I'm sorry, our our brains in our organic spacesuits can't compete. There's just the number of the amount of data that's being considered, the amount of factors that are being implicated into the overall calculation. It's just not something that we're programmed to do. But AI and machine learning, they do it fantastically. So of course, it's always going to be a volatile market. But then in Washington State, for instance, where we've had over a decade of recreational sales, these things have balanced out. Of course, the pandemic was still a big hiccup in there, but that market has matured and is actually contracting a little bit at this point. They sold $144 million less of product in 22 than they did in 21. Average ticket sales were down around $5 or so. So that market has leveled off and matured. So you don't see a great degree of volatility, a little bit of contraction here, a little bit of growth there. But all of this is so new right now that it does present a degree of particular challenges, but it's also a very new market. So as these things age a little bit, we'll get much more sophisticated with it. But right now, for those vertically integrated enterprises or the larger businesses that already have a great deal of data and are looking to, it's a particularly powerful tool at this particular time because really cannabis businesses in North America specifically, a lot of the investment interest has dried up. A lot of people got badly burned in Canada. A lot of the large, store of cannabis sort of concepts that we saw around North America are just hemorrhaging runway. And investors are kind of sick of it. They thought there was going to be a gold pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and it's just not there. So these technologies that will allow businesses to optimize what they've already got. Essentially, like, we're not looking for great big CapEx to expand. We're just taking what you're already doing and making it much more efficient, making it much more profitable, ensuring that you're charging for your product what the market will bear and not what some accountant tells you is an adequate profit margin. So it's just a matter of instead of trying to completely reinvent the wheel, just polishing the spokes on the one you're already rolling on. So I think that's a strong benefit for the cannabis industry in general.
Eric, you're talking about kind of the evolution of AI and ML and every other sort of abbreviation that's associated with predictive data tech these days.
Yeah.
It's becoming more and more accessible. The nature of tech is that it gets faster, it gets more efficient, and it gets cheaper. It's generally the kind of model that we see. And in the next 5-10 years, do you think this sort of technology is going to be used a lot more in smaller businesses, whether or not the sort of landscape of, I suppose, capital changes in the US market or elsewhere? A lot of the times cannabis businesses are often bootstrapped in a way they're not in other industries. So people want to do as much with their money as they can. Do you think tools, the tools that you're using and the other ones you kind of have experience of, do you think they'll become accessible to a point where any, like a mom and pop shop can open up and can tap into data, be it historical from another place, or start rolling with it as soon as they open?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Jamie. Thank you. And of course, when we're working with AI, it's impossible to predict. I mean, literally at this stage, every month, massive leaps forward are taking place in AI. What I play around a lot with ChatGPT-4, which is a bit of a different AI model. It's a generative AI model, whereas we're really doing pattern analytics. But that what's really interesting about some of these AI models is they are, even some of those generative models are capable of doing some of this root form analysis. So even though we are completely capable of handling small businesses, as a matter of fact, one of my big partners here in Europe, they've got 9 retail locations. So that's pretty significant, but it's not Curaleaf, for instance. So I mean, I wouldn't consider it enterprise level, but we can still produce very actionable results for them. I think the big difference is, and I guess this stems from the mindset of you get what you pay for. So of course there are bootstrapping options that are available, but and ours, with the integration and implementation, there's going to be a more of an investment in it, and sometimes that might not make sense for one or two stores. I mean, it's expensive for us to onboard a new business, so it's not something we can readily do for free. We try to keep those expenses to a minimum, but it's just a reality of integrating new technology into your IT stack. So smaller businesses can still benefit from what we do, but really where the difference lies is in accuracy. Can a chat GPT produce some output based on a specific data set that you gave it? Yeah, it can. And will the iterations that come after that, I'm just using that as an example, but we're going to see a lot more competitors come onto the marketplace.
Mhm.
Right now, I don't really see anyone doing predictive and prescriptive analytics in the cannabis space, but I know that that's only a matter of time.
Mhm.
A lot of the big analytics companies are focusing on descriptive output, helping investors digest a lot of information in the marketplace, but it's not actually making management decisions, helping to automate supply chains. That's what we do. And no one else really does that yet, but it's only a matter of time. You're already starting to see a lot of AI-driven automation taking place specifically in the greenhouses, temperature and environment control, pest management. A lot of that's already happening and it is automated. So it's only logical that you get farther down the supply chain, a lot of those business applications are going to be embracing this technology as well. So yes, there is a lowering bar, but when you've got an AI engine like ours that has been analyzing, because we work with major box retailers in the United States, and it has literally, analyzed billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in sales transactions over the last decade. That allows it to be incredibly fast and accurate, more accurate, benchmarked against Oracle's Demantra system. Actually, we're really far up there. So running with the big boys, and when you're doing that more grassroots analytics, you can get some actionable data. But whereas we can boast a 92% accuracy with a lot of our output, some of those simpler solutions might come down to a coin toss. 60 to 65% accuracies typically considered pretty good in the analytics industry. So 92 is almost too good to be true. I mean, we can prove it, but it's for some businesses, that degree of accuracy might be swatting a fly with a bazooka. When you're dealing with a large enterprise and big money, that extra point or two can mean a difference of millions of dollars in revenue. So the force multiplying effects are definitely there. Smaller businesses might be able to get away with that lower accuracy, but for the foreseeable future, I don't really see grassroots off the shelf technologies being able to rival that accuracy.
No, I was going to say, I mean, do you think, I think you've answered the question, but I'll ask it anyway. The idea that, is the cannabis industry ready for this? Is it something they can easily adopt or, mentally kind of get on board with? Or is it just like, because of the way the industry is now, in terms of a lot of companies are just trying to figure out what it means to be working in the cannabis industry rather than, but again, the argument I'd imagine is, well, if you kind of use things like this from the start, then you're going to be in a much better position to sort of scale in a way that, perhaps your competitors won't. Is that the kind of argument you'll make to a lot of people when they kind of, I'm not sure about this. This might be a bit much for us.
Right. Well, I mean, our ROI model is, and this has been battle tested, so it's not just something we calculated on paper. We pretty much pay for our system. I can't think of a single implementation where our clients haven't recovered all of their costs by the end of month 3. So this isn't like a 2-year ROI sort of investment because of the nature of the results. And frankly, a lot of the inefficiencies with which the cannabis industry has been run to this point, these turnaround efforts can be monumental in the efficiencies of the business. So everyone who I speak with is definitely interested in hearing more. And I mean, I guess that's shame on me. Like I should just be a little bit better or more persuasive with my messaging. But where the clients that have worked with it have been extremely happy with it. I moved to the European continent. I moved to Lisbon, Portugal, just over a year ago. So I'm really starting a whole new book of business and starting to tell the message all over again. So of course we're still trying to dig our feet into the dirt a little bit more in a brand new market, but I think we are a little bit ahead of the curve in Europe. There are applications for medical, but really when the adult use markets come online, that's where we're really going to shine. And then a lot of our North American clients are, begrudgingly starting to embrace us more and more, understanding that, yeah, we can't go out and buy a new greenhouse or rely on liquidations of poorly chosen assets to keep our runway going. I mean, they have to start looking at internal efficiencies.
And the way when you say begrudgingly starting to embrace us.
Exactly.
Like, well, we kind of do need this, but no. But it's interesting. It's interesting that you say that. And it's like they obviously see the value of it and they're experiencing that. And they're just like, is this something we have to do? It's like, well, absolutely. If you want to be serious about, growing your business, growing your market share and being,
Let me qualify that begrudgingly a little bit, because when 2016, that's when I mentioned that shift, when people companies started to take their data a lot more seriously, all of a sudden their mindset toward it started to change. Like in 2010, if you said, hey, can I take a look at your sales data? We'll run it through the engine and see what happens. They're like, oh yeah, totally. Like if you can clean it up, please be my guest. Now, those data are seen as a critical and valuable asset for a company, just as oil was the lubricant that helped the Industrial Revolution go. I think we can safely say that data is the real engine of the information age, and people have realized this isn't just some stuff sitting in a server somewhere. This is currency. And so when I say begrudgingly, like to get a business to just open up their data to you, it's almost like threatening their firstborn. So companies have become much more protective of their data and some of the proprietary information that can reside therein. So that recalcitrance in really just jumping on board with an external analytics provider really lies with that. Like, what are you going to do with my data? Are you going to try to monetize this another way? Are you going to share it with my competition? Like, this is critical. So establishing
it's a good thing, isn't it?
Absolutely right.
That they're taking
strong guardrails in place. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I said, people understand the value of it and they know that they need to do something with it. I think sometimes it's like, we're just holding on to it because we know. Do you find that a lot of businesses are kind of like, we know we need all of this. We don't know what to do with it. We're just going to hold on to it and keep compiling and keep holding on to this kind of black box of data eventually, so that something, we know it's going to be more valuable at some point. But there's a kind of, do you feel like there's a lack of education on what to do with it? And is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're dealing with a lot of shrewd business owners, but the whole concept of AI is still fairly new to everyone. So I'm assuming that a lot of these businesses are taking actionable decision with their data. It's just a matter of like, are you taking the kids to school on the back of a bicycle, or are you taking the kids to school in the back of a Rolls Royce? And so they understand that they're getting some output, but I don't know if what the broader market quite understands exactly what these technologies are capable of delivering. And that's an ongoing learning process, because the entire industry in general is just so new. On the other hand, it's also very, very in right now. So there's ample articles and features on the powers of AI. So really the broader media is doing a lot of my work on education for me as well. But yeah, the being able to do a 10-mile run with the data that you have versus a half or full marathon, that's really the delta that we're trying to point out here, is that, yeah, you're doing something with it, and it's great that you've got great warehousing for it, but a lot of businesses, they still don't even properly warehouse their data. It's kept in really raw, ungranular formats, and in some cases the data are in such disarray Do we actually need another AI just to align and segment the data properly before the big AI can go in and really start crunching it? In a lot of cases, especially the older companies that hadn't really focused on data management in the early days, it's all there, but it's like looking at your 11-year-old's room. It's just a complete disaster, like a hurricane went through there. So that data management is a critical component of this as well that some businesses are still coming to terms with.
Absolutely. Sorry, Jim.
No, I was just going to say, briefly mentioned that you're sort of based in Portugal these days, and speaking to the fact that what you're doing is primarily surrounding a retail environment. What sort of traction have you seen in Portugal in particular, but in Europe more generally, and where do you maybe see that going in the next couple of years? Because markets here are sort of stuttering into, I guess, kind of infancy in some way, shape or form. Medical obviously is a lot more prevalent, but from a retail perspective, we're kind of getting there sort of maybe. And it's shaping up in a different way to the US. So maybe how do you see that panning out, and how do you see, what you're doing fitting into that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think you see a lot of similarities between Portugal and the UK as far as just overall tolerance. Now the approach may be a bit different, but really what we're seeing in Portugal in particular is a lot of businesses latching on to the CBD, sort of like the Trojan horse for the cannabis markets. So you see a bunch of the CBD shops popping up everywhere, and those are sort of a resource for helping to educate the broader consumers. I was just down at a CBD shop the other day, and there was a retired aged woman that was spending a long time, like it was probably 20 minutes, just discussing a CBD oil. So definitely understand that there are benefits to this. Word of mouth is, very effective in Portugal. But there's also one interesting thing about Portugal is they decriminalized all drugs 20 years ago. So I was coming here expecting this fairly laissez-faire open market, and it's really not, because since cannabis was decriminalized with all drugs back in the early 2000s, it's sort of been classified as all drugs. So to the typical Portuguese citizen, it doesn't matter if it's cocaine or crack or cannabis or mushrooms or meth. Like it's just all drugs. And I mean, some of those are obviously very palliative and curative medicines, and others are flat out toxins. But the Portuguese community at large doesn't really embrace that. So reducing that social stigma, and I think that's prevalent across Europe as well. There's just some markets are more receptive than others. Spain with their social clubs, that seems to be a pretty successful model. They can also grow a few plants at home. So I think Spain doesn't have quite the sense of urgency, but some of the other smaller markets like Czech Republic, Portugal, Macedonia, things like that have really taken more aggressive steps to legalization. They are, I think we originally all thought that maybe the big markets like Germany would sort of lead the way, but now it's sort of like the satellite countries are almost getting sick of waiting. So
it's the smaller countries that are making those righteous moves, aren't they? It's Luxembourg, it's Malta, it's right. Switzerland,
Malta. I'm sorry, I said Macedonia. I meant Malta.
No, Malta. I meant again. It's again when we did the podcast, we got contact who's based in Malta, and she was telling us a little bit more. It's not prevalent there; it's just legal, and right. It feels like in a lot of places but again, that has to be the first step, doesn't it? It needs to be accessible. It needs to be seen. And it's like you say, it's interesting, that whole thing around all drugs are decriminalized, but it's still perceived as all drugs. It's still, bad drugs, rather than, like you say. And again, that is such a key part of, I guess, that storytelling, that narrative around, how do we normalize cannabis and things like that. And it's always struck me that a lot of technology or a lot of, that outpaces what can happen on a regulatory level, like tenfold. And so I guess governments are constantly playing catch up in many respects. But actually you're working with the Portuguese government at the moment, aren't you?
I was going to say that's another big benefit that I hope to bring in my move over to the U.S. I am actively working with the appropriate deputies within Bloco Izquierda, which is the ruling coalition left bloc. So it's a more liberal government. And they are introducing new legislation next month to Parliament to be discussed. And we've been really pulling apart that bill. It's going to go in as is for this first reading, but it's not a good bill. I mean, it's 27 pages long. It's missing at least half of it. So my partner and I, who has a legal background, we're working, and I've been active in lobbying in Arizona when they were bringing their medical program online. I've lobbied several times in Washington, D.C. at the federal level, and then I'm still actively involved in the legislative committee of the Cannabis Alliance of Washington State. And that's a really interesting role because those laws have been on the books for 10 years now. So we've had the most time to poke and prod them and fix them and understand what works and what doesn't work. And that's really the big message that I'm trying to deliver to the governments over here is like, look, I'm not coming in here as some suit wearing Westerner telling you how to do your business. I'm telling you, we monumentally screwed this up in North America. And I am a walking repository of all of those mistakes. So I would love to share those mistakes with you and give you some pointers on how to avoid falling into the same pitfalls. Now, the markets are different. The medical market is much better established in Europe than it ever was in the United States. And I see, because that was one of the first messages that I brought over here is like, look, you guys are all focusing on medical, but I'm telling you, recreational is coming. And I cannot come up with a single solitary example of any medical market surviving the transition to recreational. They just get absorbed into that marketplace. I almost think that they can have two highway systems in Europe because those medical systems are so well established and the powers that be make money selling medical cannabis. That being said, when the recreational comes online, is Tilray, like Tilray, I read the other day, they supply 60% of the medical cannabis to the Portuguese medical community. And in the last 2 years, so
they're shipping it from Canada.
No, they grow it.
They're growing in Portugal, but the brand, okay, so I'm gonna say, yeah.
But it's predominantly for export, because they in 2 years, Tilray has sold 5 kilograms of cannabis to the medical market in Portugal.
5 kilograms.
I know of dispensaries in the United States that can do that in 2 hours, not 2 years. So I mean that medical market is really anemic. And if I'm Tilray and all of a sudden recreational becomes legal and I realize, wow, I could actually cut my costs and grow more weed and sell it into this rec market, then all of a sudden, the costs and additional steps needed to go through to have medically certified product might not be as attractive. Really have to see what happens to the production part of the ecosystem. But and we see this already in the United States is speaking of efficiencies, because they're growing all of this cannabis and they have to export all of it. In Oregon right now, some of these more mature markets in the United States, they're sitting on something like 88,000 pounds. So I mean, just cut that by 2.2 for kilos, but something like 40,000 kilos of cannabis extract, and like by orders of magnitude more than that of warehoused cannabis, because they simply can't sell it. They simply produce too much.
And they can't sell it across state borders or anything, so it's got to stay within one state.
Precisely. So there's no export out for them there. But that's another great thing about integrating AI, particularly like ours, into a vertically integrated supply chain, is those sales data then report back to your production facility. And since you're using predictive, it's analyzing consumer trends and can even tell you, okay, everyone was into Blue Dream last year, but we actually think Green Crack's going to be the hot cultivar for next year. It can actually predict what consumer demand is going to be. And that way you're not sitting on a glut of product. You're growing the right product in the right amount. And that's what I'm talking. I mean, when you look at numbers like, 700,000, 325,000 kilos of excess cannabis that they can't sell, and they can't extract it because they've already got a glut of extract as well. And I mean, this is a perishable good. I mean, there is a degree of, but I mean, there's a sweet spot for cannabis, and it gets a little bit better after harvest, and then after a while it'll start to degrade. So these can't sit in warehouses indefinitely, and each day that goes by, the quality of the product degrades, particularly depending on how it's warehoused. So really optimizing these efficiencies is going to be absolutely critical for these European businesses, because I think I saw a bunch of, even at the grassroots level, I speak at conferences here, and you have these farmers coming up to you and they're like, oh, I'm thinking about tearing up all my apple trees and planting cannabis instead. And you're like, okay, great. Like, what kind? And they're like, oh, CBD flower. And it's like, that market is already so completely saturated. Like, if you want to grow hemp, try growing it for fiber, try growing it for seed or for food. These are markets, like, it's an incredible vegan protein profile. It's the cloth. I mean, I try everything I wear. I've got my hemp shirt and my hemp belt on. Practice what you preach. It's a fantastic, and the fabrics are getting much softer and more comfortable, very durable. And any sort of textile, industrial applications, we're focusing so much on being able to smoke it that I think that we're losing. Sometimes we lose sight of the broader horizon in front of us. And I think that so many people got seduced by the thought that I can grow CBD flower and just sell it, that some really stark realities kicked in when the market understood exactly how much supply was there. So I mean, even when the recreational markets come online, who knows what's going to happen? Like, there have to be guardrails around canopy. There might need to be some regulation around production levels. Because businesses otherwise, and we had that same instance in Washington State. Like, the entire law was predicated on a total of 4 million square feet of canopy, meaning that all that cannabis had to be grown under 4 million, and businesses wrote their models based on that. I know that based on this supply, I'll be able to get X amount per gram wholesale for my product. Well, we don't know what that canopy sits at right now, but it's definitely over 10 million square feet. More than twice what the original limit was, and that enforcement wasn't there. So the guardrail was up and just disregarded. So it's not enough to just have foresight of some of these market impacts. You got to stick to your guns too.
No, absolutely. And I think it comes down to the fact that ultimately, where there are regulations or kind of rules, there's always going to be ways around them. But at the same time, it's not about trying to break the law for its own sake. It's about trying to run a profitable business. And when you have a natural product, a plant essentially, or produce, as you said, it's a case of, well, there are certain quirks around it that, it's natural, it will grow in a certain way. And we need to be respectful of that. But at the same time, the more insight you have around what people are looking for, what's permissible, what you can do, then that need for data and insight becomes just so important in terms of, we need to calibrate what we can produce with what demand is versus what is permissible in the environment in which we're operating. So no, it's fascinating, and I wish you the best of luck with it. And it certainly sounds like you're got your finger on the pulse, and we look forward to finding out more about how things shake out for you, and we'll keep an eye on what's happening in Portugal, and we'll chat again, I'm sure. But thank you so much for coming on, Eric. It's been an education, so thank you.
Dave and Jamie, thank you very much for graciously hosting this morning. It's been a great time. I look forward to doing it again.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. All right, we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.